1744, the Diriya Agreement between Mohammed ibn Saud and Mohammed ibn Abd al-Wahhab was a critical moment in the development of Islam. Certainly it marked the rise of the first Saudi state, the Emirate of Diriya, which was established in 1727, before the agreement. That's what I've written. And I have indeed checked what I've written, and it's correct. By offering the House of Saud a clearly defined mission, the alliance provided the ideological impetus for future Saudi expansion. Deducing from his bitter experience in Riayna, Abd al-Wahhab had understood the necessity of political backing from a strong Islamic political entity to transform the local religious status quo and also safeguard Wahhabism from external pressure. After consolidating his position in Diriya, he wrote to the rulers and clerics of other towns, appealing them to embrace his doctrines. While some heeded his cause, others rejected it, accusing him of ignorance or sorcery. How the tables have turned. For nearly 30 years there was a war between Diriya and Riyadh, which lasted until 1773. As you'll be aware, I have, in a number of vlogs, cast doubts on the degree to which al-Wahhab was connected to British intelligence. Maybe even that al-Wahhab's interpretation of Islam was a creation of British intelligence. Although in fairness, many of the Wahhabis' beliefs do mirror traditions from the Bedouin tribes, including pre-Islamic traditions such as the hijab. At this time, Mecca, in common with many parts of the Ottoman Empire, had taverns, brothels, and homosexual bathhouses. Whether these had always been there is somewhat debated, although in general their existence is simply denied. But certainly these would have offended al-Wahhab, who wanted to return Islam to how he perceived it to have been at the time of Muhammad. Also offence was caused by the holy relics and tombs of holy men and saints which were venerated within Islam, and the Hajj pilgrims playing music on their journey. I say offence, but frankly I find it hard to see it actually causes offence. But Wahhabis are known for claiming to be offended at anything which contradicts their very rigid views. Slowly the Wahhabis and the House of Saud began to exert their influence, initially from Riyadh, then extended across the Najd, destroying tombs and shrines and enslaving thousands. In 1803, after Taif fell, the leaders of Mecca declared their allegiance to the Wahhabis. Once again, holy sites were destroyed before moving on to Medina. Their control of Mecca and Medina led them to preventing many pilgrims from completing the Hajj. In Iraq, they stormed in Kabbalah, sacking a mosque of Hussain ibn Ali. New judge and jurists were appointed, and the new religious leaders were given a fifth of all looted wealth. This caused panic within the Islamic world and embarrassment to the Ottomans, with tribal leaders being faced with the option of a massacre or receiving their share of the booty. Thus, by the 19th century, the House of Saud had spread its influence across the Arabian Peninsula, stretching from the Red Sea to the Persian Gulf and including the two holy cities of Mecca and Medina. But in 1818, forces of the Ottoman Empire sacked the capital, Riyadh, and executed many of the religious and political leaders. Over the next 80 years, the House of Saud attempted to re-establish their rule on the Arabian Peninsula, but without success. In 1902, a direct descendant of Mohammed ibn Saud, 20-year-old al-Aziz ibn Saud, rode out of the desert with 60 of his brothers and cousins to restore the rule of the House of Saud. He captured Riyadh, the ancient capital of the Saudi kingdom, But to conquer all of the Arabian Peninsula, he sought the help of nomadic Bedouins. The Ikhwan, or Muslim brothers, renowned warriors. The Ikhwan were also fervent Wahhabi Islamic Puritans who wanted to spread their form of Islam throughout the Middle East. With the Ikhwan by his side, Abd al-Aziz captured the vast desert. He captures Mecca in 1924 and Medina in 1924, becoming the ruler of the two holy cities of Islam. But the Ikhwan want to spread Wahhabism beyond Arabia, and when Abd al-Aziz tries to restrain them, they rebel. To survive, Abd al-Aziz realises that he has to destroy the Ikhwan. Abd al-Aziz seeks the approval of the Ulama, the religious authorities, regarded as the moral guardians of the realm. With the Ulama's endorsement, he crushes the Ikhwan. Abd al-Aziz ibn Saud declares himself king and gives his name to the country, Saudi Arabia. To keep the new kingdom unified, he marries a daughter from every tribe, as well as from the influential clerical families, more than 20 wives in total, although never more than 4 at one time, in accordance with Islamic law. These unions produced 45 legitimate sons and an unknown number of daughters. Abd al-Aziz then begins consolidating power away from his brothers and cousins who'd helped him to conquer the peninsula in favour of his own sons. Every Saudi king since then has been a son of Abd al-Aziz ibn Saud. When World War I came, the Turks didn't know which side to join, but knew that it was necessary to participate. Turkey, I mean, it is the Ottomans, but the Young Turks movement had started, so I think it's right to say Turkey. Turkey needed overseas investments to modernise its economy, including railway building, which an alliance might bring about, or more precisely, money to pay loans from Britain and France, supposedly used to modernise its economy. By now the Pashas, high-ranking governors, had become more important than the weak Sultan. 2 of the Pashas favoured different allies, France and Germany, whilst the Sultan remained neutral. Following a huge loan from Germany, Turkey was dragged into the war and attacked Russia. Britain and her allies attacked the Turks in the Dardanelles, but the terrain defeated this attack. Outside of Mesopotamia, or at least Basra, there was only limited fighting across the Ottoman Empire. Although Ottoman deserters, especially Arabs, did begin to exert a thorn in the side of the empire, and not so much siding with the Allies as demanding autonomy and protection from the empire. However, the main battleground for the Turks was in the Caucasus and a disastrous Persian campaign. The battleground in the Caucasus brought the Turks directly into conflict with Armenians, and major atrocities did indeed occur. Jamal Pasha's rule over the Levant was equally divisive, with many Arabs being persecuted, especially the intellectuals, creating support for Armenians amongst the Arabs. As a part of the Damascus Protocol, Faisal, the son of the Sharif of Hejaz, approached the British. The objective was to prevent the Hejaz Railroad from Damascus to Medina from being built at all cost. Not only was it fundamental to the Hajj pilgrimage, it would also be used to bringing in troops and supplies to the Hejaz. Sir Henry McMahon, High Commissioner of Egypt, 1915 to 1917, agreed with the Sharif to an Arab rebellion. By March 1916, Turkish troops had arrived in Mecca, and Mahmud received a telegram from Abdullah ibn Husayn Sharif Hassan's son, that the rebellion was ready, Mehmed dispatched the Oriental Secretary Stores to London with a team of intelligence experts. The British decision to land an invasion force in the Dardanelles instead of Alexandretta, and to promise the French Syria under the Sykes-Picot Agreement, greatly embarrassing McMahon and T. Lawrence, who had, with the Bedouins, destroyed large sections of the Hejaz Railroad. Of course, this betrayal is responsible for so much in the Middle East today. But this ignores the major divisions within the Middle East that existed prior to the agreement. Following the war, the House of Saud ripped up the Hejaz Railroad, not wanting outside influence on their country, although some architectural relics remain, which I seem to remember my English manager going in search of when I lived in Saudi Arabia. A similar pattern was repeated across the Arab world, with few railroads remaining, although I do recall taking a lovely sleeper train from Cairo to Aswan many years ago. Although Max von Oppenheim, a member of the Jewish Oppenheim family of bankers, was an archaeologist, he became head of the Bureau of the Intelligence Bureau of the East. He also met with Faisal. The Germans had an advantage, as many Arabs believed the Kaiser to have converted to Islam, naming him Haji Wilhelm. British and the French papers accused Oppenheimer of acting in ways to incite pan-Islamic jihadi massacres of Europeans, and plotting with the anti-French Algerian and anti-Italian Tripolitan rebels. His Denkschrift betreffend die Revolutionären, die Islamisch Gebiete unserer Freunde, Memorandum on Revolutionizing the Islamic Territory of Our Enemies, of October 1914, argued for enlisting the Sultan to call on the world's Muslims to engage in a holy war against the colonial powers, France and Great Britain. And in November 1914, Sultan Mehmed V indeed called for a jihad against the enemies of the Ottoman Empire. Also during World War I, there was great pressure on Muslim leaders to declare a jihad war against the Allies. I do need to add that this use of the word jihad refers to lesser jihad, not the term I accept within my own Islam, which focuses on personal transformation, or greater jihad. But it has been used throughout the history of Islam, albeit sparingly until the 16th century, possibly even until the 18th century. Even so, I cannot help but believe that the German calls for jihad were a form of hegemony, imposing the Christian notion of holy war on Islamic rulers. In late 1915, the British High Commissioner in Cairo, Henry McMahon, claimed in a report that Oppenheim had been making speeches in mosques approving for the massacre of Armenians, initiated by the Young Turk government earlier this year. There were numerous German plans to get arms from America to British India, the most famous being the Annie Larsen affair. The Merlin Committee was a group of Indian nationalists with members across the Middle East attempting to shift allegiances of Muslim soldiers fighting on the British side before assassinating British officers and forcing the British out of Asia. Their aims were for the Germans to provide money, arms and experts in military strategy, facilitate repatriation of Indian patriots in Europe and provide asylum in case of failure, and not yield to pressure as had happened in the case of the Saravkar. Trade Indians at Spandu and other military bases, including on submarine mines, publish literature in Indian languages, provide aircraft for propaganda airdrops, provide 10 rupiah banknotes for secret use, support with radio communication. No concessions to Indian principalities opposed to the plan to form a socialist republic. And members of the committee included Virendra Chattopadhyaya, alias Chatto, thank God for that, Chempakaranam Pillai, Dr. Janendra Dasgupta, and Abhisha Bhattacharya. Mahmud Hassan Deobandi travelled to the Hejaz in 1915 to ensure an Indian Muslim revolt would be supported by the Ottomans and Germans. This was given on 3 silk letters. The plan was intercepted and Mahmud arrested. Hassan was released in May 1920, and by the 8th of June 1920 he'd reached Bombay. Hassan inspired the scholars of the Deoband seminary to join the Caliphate movement. He issued a religious edict on the boycott of British goods, which was sought by students of the Muhammad Anglo-Oriental College. Sayyid Jamal al-Din al-Afghani, also known as Sayyid Jamal al-Din, 1838-39 to 9th of March 1897, was a political activist and ideologist who travelled throughout the Muslim world during the late 19th century. There's even a claim that he was one of Madame Blavatsky's ascended masters. Al-Afghani's ideology merges traditional antipathy towards non-Muslims amongst Arabs to a modern critique of Western imperialism, an appeal for the unity of Islam, urging the adoption of Western sciences and institutions that might strengthen Islam. According to Mahmud Abdel, al-Afghani's main struggle in life was to decrease British domination of the Orient and to minimise its powers over Muslims. Al-Afghani was disappointed by the failure of the Indian Rebellion of 1857 and came to 3 conclusions from it. That European imperialism, having conquered India, now threatens the Middle East. That Asia, including the Middle East, could prevent the onslaught of Western powers only by immediately adopting modern technology like the West had. That Islam, despite its traditionalism, was an effective creed for mobilising the public against the imperialists. Hassan Ahmed Aben Rahman Muhammad al-Banna, October 1906 to 12th of February 1949, also known as Hassan al-Banna, was an Egyptian schoolteacher and imam, best known for founding the Muslim Brotherhood. Al-Banna learned of the abolition of the Ottoman Caliphate in 1924, while he was still a student. This event influenced him greatly. Although the Caliphate had by now no power, he viewed its end as a calamity. He later called the events a declaration of war against Islam. Al-Banna relied on pre-existing social networks, in particular those built around mosques, Islamic welfare associations and neighbourhood groups to anchor the Muslim Brotherhood into Egyptian society. This weaving of traditional ties into a distinctively modern structure was at the root of his success. Directly attached to the Brotherhood and feeding its expansion were numerous businesses, clinics and schools. In addition, members were affiliated with the movement through a series of cells called Usar, or families. He called on Muslims to prepare for jihad against colonial powers, stating, Muslims are compelled to humble themselves before non-Muslims and are ruled by unbelievers. Their lands have been trampled over and their honour besmirched. Their adversaries are in charge of their affairs, and the rights of their religion have fallen into abeyance with their own domains. Hence it had become an individual obligation, which there is no evading, on every Muslim to prepare his equipment and to make up his mind to engage in jihad and to get ready for it until the opportunity is ripe and God decrees. Hamid Rashid Reader, 1865 to 1935, was a prominent early Sunni scholar, reformer, theologian and Islamic revivalist. In 1897, Reader, along with Rafiq al-Azam and Said Bey, formed the Ottoman Consultative Society in Cairo. The group consisted of Turks, Armenians and Circassians living in Egypt, and called for the Islamic unity under the Ottomans, which at the time were similar to those being called for by the Young Turks. During World War I, Reader's activities involved negotiating with the British and Sharif Hussain of Mecca, attempting to persuade them on issues of establishing a united pan-Islamic state with autonomy for different regions to prepare for the eventual collapse of the Ottoman Empire. He had always been suspicious of the British and became even more so after the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which was intended to divide Ottoman Arab provinces between Britain and France. A Reader saw this as an attack on all Muslims, not simply Arabs. As a Salafi scholar who called for the revival of Hadith studies and theoretician of the Islamic State, in advocating the restoration of the Caliphate, he reiterated the unity of both the spiritual and temporal aspects of Islam, which was in direct opposition to the emerging tides of secularism across the Arab and Turkish worlds. He suggested conditions necessary for the revival of Caliphate rule and proposed ways to prevent the return to Ottoman imperialism.